Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And this is indeed a substantive piece of legislation. 300 and something pages makes quite a lot of reading. And as it should be, Mr Speaker, because the production of food is the key driver for New Zealand's economic wealth and will be for many years into the future, Mr Speaker. So it is appropriate that we have a bill that has been in development stage for many years, initiated by the Labor government, Mr Speaker, and it's finally been brought to the House. And I think, as most people have said, they welcome its introduction. Labor will support this because it does a number of good things in terms of alignment and improvement in the way that food is regulated in this country. Mr Speaker, I'll go back one step and just explain why it is so important that we get it right. The Federated Farmers Conference in Invercargill not so long ago heard from a number of speakers that the opportunities for this country moving into the future in terms of food production are huge. We have a wonderful future in selling into the growing markets of both China and India. These are countries that are growing in affluence. People are wanting better quality food. They want to know where the food comes from. They need to know that it is safe. So really the opportunities are unlimited, but we have to do it right. And it's not just with exports, because if we don't have a regime in New Zealand that is best standards, international standards that is, then it's very hard to go out to the world and say, well, we export the best quality food, but we don't have the best quality food within our own shores. And that is, in fact, I guess, the reality. Many people will tell you in the agricultural and food industry that if you're manufacturing for export, the standards are higher than has been necessary for domestic consumption. And that's not really the way that it should continue. And I guess the misalignment in the number of pieces of legislation governing food production has been in part responsible for that. So the previous government saw the wisdom in bringing all of that food production under one piece of legislation. There was extensive consultation out around the industry, and I think for the most part the industry fully supports this doorstopper here, Mr Speaker, and I'm sure that you, like many members of Parliament, will have read it. I'm sure the Minister has, from front to back and twice over. But brand New Zealand must be upheld. The integrity and safety of our food production must be absolute, Mr Speaker. No one can have any doubt that we should be and are the country of finest food production in the world. So what we've done here, Mr Speaker, is gone through and aligned the standards, and as one of the speakers said, the previous one said, make it easier. Well, I'm not sure that making it easier is the objective of the bill. It shouldn't be. It should be making the system better, that is, more consistent, more effective, and guaranteeing that whoever from this country who goes offshore or who sells into the domestic market can say, I know how this food was produced, I know where it came from, and it is safe for consumption. Because, as previous speakers have said, there are far too many cases of foodborne illness in this country. Cost us, I think the calculation is something like $80 million a year. Huge figure, Mr Speaker, just from not eating the right food or not handling it, and we must try our best to reduce that, aside from all the issues of our reputation. Mr Speaker, we'll just go through some of the processes in the bill and the, I guess, the basic concept of a company having a food plan. And that is if they are substantive producers of food, they will have to effectively develop their own food plan. Now, there will be a template, I understand, that means that sectors or businesses don't have to keep reinventing the wheel, and I think that it's a very smart move. Too often we, through the RMA or other pieces of legislation, we place an obligation on organisations to come up with their own safety plan or audit or whatever. There will be a template. Companies or organisations can go, have a look at that and see how it applies to their organisation. There will be the ability for them to have their own food plan if they fall outside the basic parameters laid down. So no one will be exempt on the basis that they don't quite fit the square box. And we welcome that. There will be some questions around the issue of I guess, self-policing. The basis of it is developing your own food plan, having the standards and maintaining those standards. Now, the meat industry, for example, at the moment is under huge pressure. I'm not sure that we could rely on the meat industry to police their own standards of processing and export. We need, in many cases, to have an oversight body. That will be a local body in many cases. They will have to monitor the food plans. So while we'll be relying on self-policing, ultimately there must be a penalty regime, an oversight body that can step in, because when pressures come to any business or organisation, then people do tend to cut corners. We cannot afford to have any food business, be it a restaurant, be it a takeaway bar, or be it a major exporter, cutting corners in this area. As I've said, Mr. Speaker, our reputation is at risk here. So the custom food plan that might have applied to an organisation that falls outside the realms or the ability to get a template will be overseen by the Territorial Local Authority or by MAF ultimately. Of course, there are some questions, and this is maybe not the time to raise this debate, but the Food Safety Authority now being merged back into MAF, there are questions of I guess, expertise, of possible dumbing down of that. I know that MAF, and the Minister shakes her head, I hope she's right, but I know that MAF is often consumed by its trade interests, Mr. Speaker. It will on many occasions advise ministers that we shouldn't provide any assistance here because it might impact on our trade reputation offshore. Well, we have to make sure that MAF doesn't compromise its advice to ministers or its operation of policing the food bill. It should not compromise that in any way, and I think that MAF just has to take a close look at itself and assess whether it can objectively maintain the highest standards and not be subject to issues of trade or of industry lobbying or whatever, Mr. Speaker. The food handler guidance regime is one that was of concern when Labor was looking at this legislation. That is the ability for people to have sausage sizzles, fundraising activities, and I know there was a concern that we might have the food police and the food Nazis, I think was a nasty word termed at that time, coming in to stop people selling sausages. No, that is not the case, but where there is a regular activity around that, and the many schools, many organisations, St John's, fire brigades or whatever, will have on a regular basis sausage sizzles or selling other forms of food, Mr. Speaker. They need to know that they can continue to do this, and we certainly intended that to occur. I'm sure that the Primary Production Select Committee, in following this bill through the process, will try to uphold that, but I have to ask of the Minister, and again of MAF and of local authorities, will you ensure that we don't have overzealous people policing the sausage sizzles? Because I know most of them now, people wear gloves. The old days of having a cigarette, a smoking, wheezing kind of enthusiastic school secretary handing you a sausage sizzle. Well, yes, the Minister, they did taste different, and I guess they did help build up our immunity to many things, but I think those days have long gone, and I think we have to ensure that in upholding higher standards, we don't open the door for an overzealous local council rep to come along and shut it down. So I think we reached a good compromise in that area, and I hope that we can maintain that through the process of the Select Committee and finally back through this House. Mr. Speaker, Labor supports the bill. We've been very proud to be part of its development, and we support the government now in bringing it through and ensuring that we have in place the best system of food management in the world, so we can rightfully go off, uphold brand New Zealand and say that we will now and into the future produce the highest quality food for the top-end consumers, be they in China, India or the European Union or the US, Mr. Speaker. I commend the House and I recommend and support its passage through the House.